people say Carson Beck is a big question mark in this game. I don't think that's the case. I have full trust in him going into this.
Indiana's been a step ahead of everybody, especially on defense this year. And they are so well-schooled and so dialed in.
I think there's more pressure on Indiana. Talk to Matt Leinart about the pressure that USC had on them going into that Rose Bowl against Texas.
I'll be pulling for you guys. Here we go. One last time. One last time. Zoom out for the U. Here we go, baby.
They do not profile like a 10-win team. They profile like 7-win type teams. I can't wait to let 18 to 22-year-olds emotionally ruin me.
I made a call, to Vegas. I said, look, we actually need the paper here.
Welcome in, Bruce and the Bear. Bear Bets College Football Championship Game preview. One game to go, Bruce. Number 1, 15-0 Indiana team that is ripped through the college football playoff against the last team in the field, number 10 seeded Miami. 3 games, maybe 2 nail biters, and maybe the Ohio State game was a bit of a nail biter too, but Canes were the last team in, and they're one of the last 2 teams standing.
Yeah, I guess, look, you and I had a lot of conversations on this podcast over the year. Maybe they were being disrespected later in the process by the CFP. Obviously, they got it right at the end. And I'll be honest, I think there's a couple of things that have been like they're playing better now than they did in the regular season. And a lot of that, I think, is how they run the football. I think they're in the 70s nationally ranking just in terms of like total rushing yards per game. But Mark Fletcher has been healthy. I know he was sick for for one of the games, battling the flu. He's been a monster, and he's such a good fit for what they do. And now you're talking about a run game that it's not like they've played bad defenses. It was A&M who's got that, hellacious third down package, but they got a bunch of dudes, and Mike Elko is really good, and it was on the road. Ohio State with an elite defense, and they ran for a 150, and Fletcher almost got 100. And then against Ole Miss, which is not a bad defense, again, they couldn't, they basically couldn't slow that run game down. And I think that's the part that's been really eye-opening for a lot of people is like, whoa, these guys are more physical than we gave them credit for. And I talked to coaches who played him at Ole Miss and they're SEC coaches, and like, this is the best offensive line and the most physical team we've seen. And usually you don't say that about an ACC team if you're in the SEC.
And you mentioned that A&M third down defense and how great they were. That was a team that number 1 in the nation in third down defense. Miami did not have a ton of success on third down, 3 or 12 in that game. Indiana, another very good third down defense. So we'll see if Miami can have some success there. You mentioned the running game of Fletcher, and I wonder, in terms of betting this game flow, I did bet Miami's rush yards total over 104.5 because they've had over 150 yards at all these playoff games and against some really good defenses. And if you look at the way the game, I think, is going to be played. Remember, Miami doesn't have Xavier Lucas, one of their better defensive backs, for the first half of the game. I think you're going to see Miami really lean on that run game, kind of try and shorten the number of plays that Indiana may have in the first half, just so they don't have to worry about defending those 3 great wide receivers down a key man in the secondary. So you can also find a juiced under 24.5 in the first half. I could see the first half of the Miami Ole Miss game, you saw a couple of 13 double-digit play drives, and Miami really dominate the time of possession in the first half. Kind of feels like a similar game script here, don't you think?
It does. I talked to one of the Miami coaches who was like, this could be one of the fastest title games in history, because Miami wants the long drive. It's almost going to be like a service academy game if it goes well for Miami. Now, there's 2 things that have come up. I talked to a dozen coaches for a story I did on The Athletic Friday. And one of the things that you hear a lot is it's really, really hard to run the ball on Indiana, even if their defensive line isn't that big, it's not small, but relative to some other teams and certainly relative to the Miami offensive line, I think they may be giving up almost 50 pounds a man. But what you hear about a lot is because they do such movement and they're so good at getting off blocks, that's going to be the challenge for Miami. Now, the other challenge is going to be if they can get those 12, 14, 15 play drives, which we know Mario Cristobal really wants, is can they finish off drives in the red zone? The thing about Indiana's defense is, and I think this stat maybe fell off a little bit against the Oregon game, which was such a blowout, getting into the second half. I don't want to throw all the stats out from that game, but like before that game, Indiana, for I think what it is, the first 14 games of the season, had the best red zone touchdown defense in terms of like holding people to field goals or nothing of anybody in college football in the last decade. I think you have to go back to an LSU defense from the Les Miles days when it was that much of a dominant shut you down red zone defense. And I think for Miami, the big key, and I heard this from coaches, from the Big Ten, is you got to get some touchdowns in there because they're going to score being Indiana. So like, and also Miami's, again, part of this was, I think, a windy day at A&M, but their kicker has not been the most reliable and you can't afford missed field goals. But I do think what you said is true. I mean, a 12-play drive where you run the clock down and shorten the game and maybe wear Indiana down a little bit, even if you only get 3, I think that's probably a win more now than it is considering what you're talking about. We're missing one of their better cornerbacks for the first time.
You look at the Ohio State Indiana Big Ten championship game. You mentioned the importance of the red zone. That's what cost Ohio State in the game. 4 red zone trips, 1 touchdown. They missed obviously a short field goal. Stopped. It was a disaster in there because I think a lot of people came away from that game thinking Ohio State kind of let that game get away, and it was Indiana's red zone defense that was the biggest difference in that game. One of the two things that really has me concerned, and you hear people talk about Indiana, is how well the back 7, especially secondary linebackers, how well they tackle. They're always in position, and that's ultimately what makes it so difficult to run on them. They know where to be. They're so well schooled in knowing opponents' tendencies and breaking down game film and preparation. So like that has me concerned. But I will say this: if anyone who has watched Miami football this year, and if you watched the games and you've listened to Kirk Herbstreit, Joey Galloway, Dusty Dvorak, and others, Louis Riddick, watch the Miami receivers and running backs block. For Malachi Toney, for as short as he is and as light as he is, he blocks like a son of a gun. CJ Daniels, probably one of the best blocking wide receivers in the country. We'll go back and watch the A&M game and look at him block in that game. Mark Fletcher didn't miss a block in the Ole Miss game, but again, very good blocking running back. We'll see maybe if that is a little bit of, I don't want to say kryptonite, but if that maybe gives Miami a little bit of an edge and maybe gives them a little higher success rate than some of the other teams Indiana did play this year.
Yeah, I definitely heard that from the playoff teams. They gave a ton of credit to how Miami's receivers crack and they're picking up safeties, and sometimes your corners are going to have to make tackles against Mark Fletcher. And Mark Fletcher's a big man. One of the Ole Miss coaches was like, I re-recruited him in high school. I told the guys on the staff, this guy is a beast. Like, I think people know he's a big back. I mean, he's like Miami's answer to Derrick Henry. He's not quite that big, but he's bigger than most running backs you're going to see. And I think relative to, Barry, you're talking about Ohio State and their issues in the red zone against Indiana. Ohio State's run game, as good as that offense is and as great as the receivers are, this was not last year's Ohio State team.
No quarterback run at all this year.
No quarterback run. And by the way, Will Howard's a big dude, by the way. The 2 running backs they had last year are elite. Not to say Bo Jackson's not a good running back, but he's a freshman and he's not those guys. And also, Chip Kelly, the thing he does best is design stuff in the run game. I think that was a difference too. again, I'm not diminishing what Indiana did beating them. That's a really good win. They sacked Sayin 5 times. But I think this is a different kind of run game they're going to be going up against. Indiana's been a step ahead of everybody, especially on defense this year, and they are so well schooled and so dialed in. But we'll see, like what kind of answers Miami has for this. Also, I think, Oregon, it felt like they shot themselves in the foot so fast it was playing into Indiana's hands. If Carson Beck's first pick is a pick, the first throw is a pick, then Miami is going to be in it. We'll see where it goes. I'm guessing they're going to probably be a lot more cautious, safer. Yeah, I was going to say cautious, but yeah,
cautious is a good word too.
Yeah,
that's another. There's so many amazing stats about Indiana this year, but 4 times this year, 4 times in 15 games, they have recorded an interception on the opponent's first or second play of the game. And that's just incredible. Like UCLA was one of them. Last week, the Oregon game was one. Iowa was one, and there was one other one mixed in there as well. Again, there's some bad quarterbacks in there as well, but just being able to go in and dissect opponents, and that's what you're playing from ahead most of the game. If you're scoring before you even have the ball, it's a good way to start games.
No doubt. And again, I think on the Oregon case, from what I had heard, the receiver split wasn't great. And I think Pons kind of got a tell on it. He could see from the split. And then all of a sudden, I think Dante Moore's pass was a little behind. So it really just kind of, I don't want to say it made it easy for Pons to pick it and jump it and go. But, I'm sure Miami's going to be much more cautious. And look, in the one game where it was Carson Beck's worst game, the Louisville game, one of the coaches I talked to was like, either he went in there way overconfident and he just didn't look like he prepared, and he just threw the ball up for grabs. I remember that. He threw 4 picks. I think
one was called back. It could have been 5.
Yeah, and he probably completed over 70% of his passes, but I just felt like in that game, it looked like he thought, oh, I got Randy Moss out there. Like, Miami's receivers are good, especially Malachi Toney. There's no Calvin, I don't know, it's Calvin Johnson. There's no Charlie Becker out there of a big 6'4" go win, put the other team at a disadvantage every time it goes up. They just don't have that.
Yeah. I think they're hoping that Josh Moore can become that. And that's the interesting thing about Miami's offense is they don't have, Tony's fantastic, but everyone's kind of contributed in the playoff. The Indiana receivers as a whole are better, but even JoJo Trader had a big catch on third down against Ohio State and threw a great block on a big play for Miami in the Ole Miss game. Josh Moore had a big catch. Keelan Marion had an unbelievable game against Ole Miss. CJ Daniels, in addition to his blocking, the bubble screen against Ohio State to kind of he's put that game away. So they've gotten plays. Lofton had an unbelievable catch on the play that he got knocked out on. So while as a whole, it's not a super production group, they've all had their impact. And on Carson Beck, I almost wonder, and I think the numbers do bear this out, that after the Louisville and SMU games, it almost became him not acknowledging, I guess isn't the right word, but accepting, understanding that, you know what, I don't need to go out and throw the ball all over the place. I can take the shorter routes. We can rely on the offensive line. Like, if you look at the pressure rate for Miami, the difference between what they allow and what they produce, it's by far the biggest difference in the country. So numbers bear out that they're the best team up front on both sides of the ball. But I think Carson, the relief that he's had later in the year, that's kind of resulted in him playing better. And there's that great shot of him when he scored the winning touchdown against Ole Miss, that exultation of, it was almost like the end of Shawshank Redemption with Tim Robbins, where he's standing there in the rain after he breaks out of jail. The look on his face, the scream that he kind of let out, it was almost like the exhale from him, all the weight of the world, the pressure all off. We won, I scored, we're playing for the national championship. So people say Carson Beck is a big question mark in this game. I don't think that's the case. I have full trust in him going into this game.
Bear, I want to ask you this. So I think Mendoza has been fantastic, and he's gotten better and better. It's like 8 touchdown passes, 5 incompletions in
Correct.
the playoff, right?
Insane.
Yeah, you used the word pressure a minute ago, and I'm going to use it in a different context, not like from a play to play thing. Indiana's 15-0. Our friend Greg McElroy brought up, is this team, because they've smashed, two playoff opponents, in a spectacular fashion. Like, are they in the caliber of like 2019 LSU and starting that? Like, who do you think there's more pressure on right now? Miami, who's trying to get back to being the U, and it's in their backyard. And you got all these, Michael Irvin, Ray Lewis, and you can go down the list. Andre Johnson's there, or is it Indiana? I'm sure, they know they're a big favorite, but I'm not sure they're checking the point spread like you and Sammy P are from hour to hour. But where do you think the pressure is, and how do you think that, if anything, factors into what's going to happen Monday night?
I think there's more pressure on Indiana to go down to be the first 16-0 team in college football history, to have a roster like this with the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, experienced players, 5-year guys who have been with Cignetti, and the dominance that they've had. People are talking about them as one of the best teams in college football history. Talk to Matt Leinart about the pressure that USC had on them going into that Rose Bowl against Texas, and hearing about greatest team ever, and you're going to beat Texas, and going down, repeating. They felt it all year long, and then it built to that point. And I'm sure, you can say all the right things about Cignetti, and we're building the superpower in college football. This is going to be a yearly occurrence, but you don't know. You never know when you're ultimately going to get back to this point. And this is kind of a perfect season, a magical season for Indiana. And if you don't finish it off, as a role of a big favorite, you're going to be extremely disappointed, and feel like you let one get away. Whereas if you're Miami, now look, I'm not saying that they're dealing with house money and no one expected them to be there, but no one thinks they can win. They're basically going out there, all right, let's just play ball, see what happens. I think in a game like this, there is always more pressure on the team that is expected to win and has so much more to lose if you do lose.
Yeah, there's something, I don't know if you're old enough to remember this. I mean, you're a little younger than me, but I remember going down to South Florida with my family. I was, I think I was in middle school maybe. And it was Miami's first national title game. And so Howard Schnellenberger's the coach. And I remember the Miami Herald, we would get the Miami Herald when, every day that, that 2 weeks or whatever when we were there. It was like a different, this was the Nebraska team of Turner Gill and Irving Fryer and Mike Rozier and Dean Steinkooler. And again, I don't want to say in that day and age, college teams were way different than NFL teams, right? It was a different offense and everything. But that was supposed to be the greatest team of all time. And you're just thinking, Miami with the quarterback who wears number 20, can they, I didn't know enough to know enough at that point. But I remember thinking this would be, and you probably know what the spread was. I don't know what it was, but it just seemed like that was a David versus Goliath. It's hard to call, Indiana, which was until a month ago or so, the all-time, the most losingest program in college football history. But they do have the Heisman Trophy winner and the presumptive first pick in the draft on there, and they're just crushing people. And again, I don't think this is a David versus Goliath, where all of a sudden the team that's won 5 titles in its history is the David, and they have a bunch of high draft pick guys on their own team. But it is an interesting juxtaposition, because I'm with you. I feel like this has been just such a storybook season from the Hoosiers, right from the win at Autzen to beating Ohio State. At that moment, everybody's like, ooh, maybe they're better than we thought, and I think that's a big function of it. Because just, again, you look at it as Penn State's better than their record was, but it was that almost went the wrong way. And, it just, you wonder, I mean, do you need, would it have bettered them off if they lost one of those games? Because then you don't get the storybook kind of vibe about it, where everybody feels like they're just preordained to run the table.
Yeah, you're 9.5-point favorite at Iowa earlier in the year, and it's 10-10 going into the fourth quarter. Like Nebraska, by the way, an 11-point favorite in the 1984 Orange Bowl against Miami. So there's your answer to that. Now, on the other side of the ball, Miami, that I've talked to coaches as well, and like that Miami, they have the utmost respect for that Miami defensive line rather, and you'd have to assume that this is going to be the best front that Indiana has faced all year long. I know defense as a whole, Ohio State was a great defense, but I don't think that front is probably as good as what they're going to face on Monday night.
No, I think the edge guys Ohio State have are good. I think honestly Miami's are elite, and they're honestly bigger. Especially, Bain looks almost like a 3 technique, and they move him around, right? And Ruben Bain, just even when I think he had 4.5 sacks in the first 2 playoff games, and then against Ole Miss, he didn't have big numbers, but you get the PFF numbers. And he was like the best defensive player of the 2 games in the playoff. And I think that presents some challenges, certainly. I mean, and then I think for Miami, what's going to be interesting, because I think Indiana has a good run game. It's not flashy, but they're super physical. Does Miami have issues with those 3 receivers or Riley Nowakowski, kind of the H-back who Indiana does a lot of stuff with, who I feel like is pretty underrated? One of the head coaches I talked to in the Big Ten was like, that guy always shows up, but I think what's changed them a little bit is midseason, Surratt gets hurt, and then Charlie Becker emerges, like a high school track guy from Tennessee who's long and fast. And everybody I talked to who played him was like, on film, he's kind of a guy, but he's better when you see him in person. The 50-50 balls, like, how does that match up with Miami? Again, as you said, Xavier Lucas, who's a big corner, is down the first half, and is as dialed in as Mendoza's been on these balls. Like, if Miami can't get pressure and keep pressure on Mendoza, because we know Mendoza can run. I think, like, this year more so than last year, I think people are like, oh yeah, everyone's kind of realized he's more athletic than you think. He's more athletic than you think. And then all of a sudden you're like, no, he's just athletic. And, but Corey Heatherman, Cristobal's defensive coordinator, remember, he came from this, like, he's a Cignetti guy. Before he was at Rutgers, before he was at Minnesota, he was at JMU. And so there's a lot of similarities, because there's such overlap. I think this is going to be really fun to see how that part plays out.
Yeah, I think Motore is someone in the run game that I think him stepping up. I think that will be a big factor in how well Jacoby Thomas and Keontae Scott handle that third wide receiver as well. That'll be, and Scott has been fantastic, and Jacoby Thomas was fantastic in the bowl game, the Fiesta Bowl as well. So we've got personnel. Usually in a game like this, you mentioned the familiarity with Heatherman working under Kurt Cignetti. Like, it's going to be whatever coordinator, coach, whomever, they can come up with a wrinkle, something different, that something isn't out there on tape, nothing that's been seen so far to kind of create a big play when you have such familiarity with the other side of the ball.
No doubt.
The portal. How much time do we have, my friend? What's going on? Crazy year so far in this portal was a big factor as to why both these teams are here now, and it certainly looks like it's going to be a big factor moving forward.
No doubt. I mean, you look, obviously, both quarterbacks are just 2 of the many guys who landed in probably a better spot. And now you look, I mean, when you say crazy, the first thought is the DeMond Williams Jr. story with Washington, where he signed with them, I think, January 2nd. It's a deal in the, north of $4 million. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, he did what? And, I think we talked about this the last time, or maybe the time before last, about just how that played out. And he's staying. I think that's probably certainly a good thing for Washington as they work on some damage control and try to get that, try to get people on the same page there. The other bigger news in the Big Ten was that Dante Moore decided to come back. And it had been trending that way for a while. The
Good
people
move
I
by him.
talked to had said he was not in a rush. Early in the year, he felt like it was better for his development. Obviously, Oregon can pay him a lot of money. He doesn't want to go, I don't think it's like, oh, the Jets are there. What do we, I'll go anywhere but the Jets. But I just think it's really good for Oregon for this. And you just see all these moves that have come, around it. So now you have Dylan Raiola, former 5-star who was up and down at Nebraska now.
You would have to think, right, Dylan Raiola kind of knew this was the direction this was headed, right?
Yeah, I think it was one, you saw what it did for Dante Moore. You can develop, maybe you get in better shape. Maybe we work on some things with you. And I think that's a win-win for Oregon and certainly for Raiola to learn behind Dante Moore and see where that goes. And then I think you look, plus you get Evan Stewart back. He's one of their most talented receivers who missed all of the year. You do have to rebuild the offensive line, but you have the defensive line. A lot of those guys, Amari Washington, who's a monster, super athletic, 330-pound guy, he's back. You have a lot of guys there. I mean, you get Coy Parrish, who I don't know if he's better than Dylan Thieneman, who was also at at a Big Ten school and came in and had a, great second act, but he's a playmaker and they can do probably a lot. I don't know if they want to mess with him on offense like PJ Fleck did, but he's, I think that's a great addition. And you look at Texas, they add Raleek Brown, they add Cam Coleman, they've just surrounding Arch with more firepower. It's going to be a fun season. It's going to be a fun offseason because you got between them. And then you look at what Notre Dame's done, Bear. I mean, I thought they made a terrific hire a week or two ago. Charlie Partridge, who was a longtime Pitt, South Florida guy, longtime Pitt D-line coach, cranked out really good D linemen. And then he was with the Colts for 2 years, goes to Notre Dame. He's got Keon Keeley, who's a former 5-star D lineman, at Alabama. He goes there. You had Francis Brew, who was at Pitt, was one of the best young defensive tackles in college football. Those guys are, on the move there. I really like what Notre Dame has done to surround CJ Carr. I know we'll talk about this probably a little later with when Sammy P's on about what this shapes up for looking ahead to next year. But there's a lot of interesting moves that have already been made outside of Lane Kiffin's at LSU and who's going to, those things. There's just a lot of stuff that's gone on.
And something that's still ongoing right now is the TRINIDAD CHAMBLISS situation at Ole Miss. Personally, I am not for getting these sixth and whatever many years. I think it's terrible. I think we need roster turnover. I think we need these high school kids to come in and play. It was initially ruled, denied, but we all know how this is trending, right? They're going to go find a friendly judge in the state of Mississippi and appeal to there and say, oh, no, you're good. You can play, right?
Yeah. I talked to somebody on the Ole Miss staff who was extremely confident that at the end, TRINIDAD CHAMBLISS was going to be their quarterback next year and that they would have Deuce Knight, former Auburn quarterback, high-level Mississippi high school kid, going to be, similar to that Raiola role where he's going to just learn behind TRINIDAD CHAMBLISS. And look, he was terrific, even in a defeat. I mean, he was great against Georgia. And so, I don't think Ole Miss is going away by any stretch. I think they're going to be, especially with him back, I think they're a legit playoff contender again. And we'll see what else Pete Golding will add around him, or as, the portal's about to wrap up now, but still.
Do you think that this is going to be a trend moving forward in the portal? Because now, in most likelihood, you're going to have Ole Miss set at quarterback probably for the next 3 years. You assume CHAMBLISS 1 year, final one more year, and then Deuce Knight 2 more years. Look at LSU. You buy your guy Levitt for 1 more year. You buy your guy Longstreet. You're going to probably have for the next 2 years. Do you think this kind of roster stacking at the quarterback position is that what we're looking forward, thinking that this might be the way to go, as opposed to situation at Miami where you had 1 year you had Cam Ward, 1 year you had Carson Beck, and now they're still out there as we're recording this, looking, hopefully trying to find someone to come in, but it seems like Ole Miss and then Lane have kind of figured this out a way to, and even Oregon now, kind of you're set now for the next 3 years.
You'd think. It's hard to, in this day and age, I feel like it's harder to predict those things because in a lot of ways, that's what Sark and Texas did. I mean, Arch wasn't a portal guy, but they had Arch. You don't need to rush into it. His family was really, I thought, savvy and understanding the big picture to play the long game and learn behind Ewers. And then all of a sudden, when you're ready, I know that people will do the, oh, well, if he was so good, why was he not playing kind of thing.
Right.
But I think people have seen it really worked out well for Oregon. Like, I don't think Dante Moore was a slam dunk. Oh, he's going to go in and be ready for the NFL. I mean, he's 20 years old still, right? Chambliss' story is a little different, but also you're talking about a guy who's, I don't know, he's 5'10" and a half, maybe 5'11", 195 pounds. It's not like as good as he was this year. It's not like all of a sudden the NFL is definitely going, oh yeah, that guy's going to be a top 10 pick, right? And so I think this will be interesting to see, how it works out with Longstreet was an interesting move to me, just in that you're a Southern California kid who had learned Lincoln Riley's system. You're going to be behind Jaden Mayava for another year, but now you're going to learn Lane's system. You're going to go to another, and he's a guy who's moved a bunch in high school. I think he was committed to A&M for a while, and then he flipped to USC late. We'll see how this works out for him. I'm interested to see what USC ends up doing, going forward after Mayava. But, best laid plans don't always work that way for, I'm sure one of these schools, one of the three we talked about, it's not going to play out that way.
Right.
Somebody will get hurt. Something will happen. It just seems to be the nature of college football now.
Before we get to Sammy, I asked the guys the other day, 2 years of the 12-team playoff, and you've had 4 repeat teams in there. 3 of them are the teams from the Big Ten: Oregon, Indiana, Ohio State, Georgia being the other one to get in. Can we take anything away from that in terms of like biggest disparities in conference and like the SEC and the lack of turnover there, or I should say the turnover there, but you still got like the powerhouses at the top of the Big Ten, and you're seeing those teams get in again. Is it just too soon to jump to judgment on anything? Or there anything that you've noticed in the first 2 years of the playoff that kind of maybe caused you to say, or I'm looking forward to seeing if this actually plays out eventually moving forward?
Bear, I think the biggest thing, and we've talked about this some, is just that the SEC isn't as elite as it used to be.
Agreed.
It's just diminished the top. And look, Georgia isn't quite what Georgia used to be, but Georgia was the one that was the stacked program, right? The fact that Alabama couldn't run the football like pretty much all year is kind of an indictment of like what that roster looked like and how they were. You go around and you see whether LSU, we got, bad fit head coach, you have a pretty talented roster, but I think there were some issues there. Obviously, Ole Miss was sorted out. I think A&M, Elko did a really good job elevating them, and certainly, Texas, I feel like wasn't quite as experienced this year, certainly on offense, as they were last year, and next year will be a big year for Texas. I feel like they're loaded. I don't know what the expectation. I know what the expectation is, but like for LSU, I mean, Lane's gonna have like his top 8 offensive linemen are going to be completely different than what they were there last year.
And they weren't very good last year, that's for sure.
They were not. And remember, this is a team that I think had 4 Senior Bowl offensive linemen the year before, including Will Campbell, a top 5 pick. So it was going to probably be worse. But I think, that position, as we've seen with Indiana, as we've seen with Miami, is so critical, in terms of like how it works out. And I think, the SEC will be interesting to see how much they can bounce back from this going forward, because you saw a bunch of coaching changes too. Whereas with the Big Ten, I don't think those 3 top teams are going anywhere. I mean, I don't think they're regressing, is my point, and when I look at Penn State is, to me, the wild card in this, because I do think Matt Campbell's a really good coach, and he's bringing a bunch of his guys from Iowa State. Like, I don't know, that program imploded this year. Felt like a house of cards. I could see them being a lot better and being a playoff team next year. And then, is there somebody else? Like, I think whoever Miami's quarterback's going to be next year, I think Mario Cristobal and their, infrastructure has figured out how they want to be, and then it's hard to tell on what you're getting from I know SMU is pretty good and they're going to be pretty good as long as he's there. But some of these other teams like Clemson, I don't know what to make of Clemson right now. They're losing a bunch of really good players to the NFL. Now they're getting in the portal, to try to upgrade. Florida State, it's anybody's guess what's going on there, right? It's a weird conference. And then you obviously look at the Big 12. I mean, Texas Tech's still spending a lot of money. So, I think it's going to be a fascinating offseason, especially in the SEC, to see how this sets up. All right, Bear, let's get to the walkthrough. We bring it in Sammy P. He's always got some good stuff. Sammy P, what are you hearing about the public bets about this matchup for the title game?
Wonder who they like, Bear. What do you think? The team who's blown out
I wonder if
Alabama?
they like the undefeated 15-0 number one ranked team that's won 2 college football playoff games by 35 points each and has a quarterback that's completed thrown 8 touchdowns and thrown 5 incompletions. I wonder if that's who they like.
I was told by one bookmaker in Vegas, this is America's darling. And if you didn't believe going into the playoff, Bruce, you do now. Blow out Alabama. You blow out Oregon. When the wise guys bet on Oregon, they bet 4.5, 4, 3.5. Wise guys loved Oregon, got shoved. It's Hoosier hysteria. And guys that I talked to are saying 8 of every 10 bets on the side on Indiana.
It's interesting to me a little bit in this regard, guys, where, being at the Rose Bowl, I mean, that was an Alabama team that didn't, barely got into the playoff, kind of was gifted the win against Oklahoma. And then Oregon, I'm curious, was it the same Oregon team that they beat, a couple of months earlier in Eugene? They were down 6 running backs. It felt like they imploded a little bit. Not to take anything away from Indiana. I think it's been a remarkable story. I don't know. Sammy P, what are the folks at the Westgate talking about with Indiana here that you've heard?
Well, they're going to get buried on the other side. So John Murray, one of Bears guys, one of my guys, he said that they are just so liable on Miami futures because heading into the release show, they put up big numbers on Miami. And then once Miami got into the bracket, the Westgate guys didn't think they were going to make a run. So there were big prices that got bet. The last thing, Bear, the Westgate needs in Vegas is Miami winning the game outright.
So somehow I think John Murray and Ed Salmons and Jeff Sherman and those guys, I think they'll be able to turn the lights on still, even if Miami wins. So I'm going to be rooting for my alma mater. But I want to touch on something that Bruce said before, and it's something that I think is a reason why we've seen this line move, and I wonder if it's a little bit excessive. This was an Alabama team that played terribly the last 6 weeks of the year for the most part. They probably shouldn't have been in, but they were in because politically the committee wasn't going to leave a team that played in the SEC championship out. It was a team that got blown out by Florida State. It was a team that very easily could have lost to Auburn in the final regular season game. It was a team that couldn't run the ball all year. It was a team whose offensive line struggled. They had a ton of warts, and they did get in, and predictably, they got blown out by Indiana. I think that name sticker shock, Indiana blew out Alabama in the Rose Bowl. I think people that caught neutral observers' eyes. And then what Bruce said about the Oregon game. Oregon they could have used LaMichael James and Reuben Drones at running back that day with some of the injuries and how much they were down there. And I didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal. I thought Dan Lanning and that staff will be able to hold it together and prepare. But you hear about Tosh LeBoy and Will Stein and just their commitments as head coaches at Cal and Kentucky and the amount of time they had to spend on that. Did that take away from some of the game planning? Did that affect the Oregon staff? Again, Indiana blew them out, but again, Oregon turned the ball over 3 times deep inside their own territory. Gift wrap, 21 points for Indiana. If Miami does that on Monday night, they got no chance. But I think all of the optics of this and the recency bias of those 2 games has really moved this line a little bit too far, Sammy.
And we do see the buy. I mean, you see bets. South Point came off the 9. The offshores came off the 9. So, Bruce, there has been a little resistance. I mean, this opened in Vegas at 7.5. Indiana
Yeah,
favored by 7.5. Got to 9. I think some guys were hoping they would get 10. 10 ain't happening.
No.
The resistance came in at 9. Miami bets came in at +9.
On that point about the 2 coordinators at Oregon who ended up, as Power 4 head coaches. What was different, I think, and we talked about this a little bit on our show at Fox around the Holiday Bowl. What was going to be different for Oregon in that round as opposed to the first round of the playoff is the portal was open.
Yep.
So there was a lot more moving parts for those 2 first-time head coaches who were also on the Oregon staff, and some of their guys were moving too. Sammy P, we haven't even played this game Monday night yet. And as we always do in all sorts of things, we can't wait to look ahead. So what have you been hearing about next year's championship odds that are in play?
Well, we don't have to go too far from the betting board this past summer. I talked to Brad Powers, who's a very sharp college football bettor. He moves lines every Sunday. I asked him a question. I said, who's favored next year at the book of Brad Powers? And he said, easy, Texas. Because Texas has Arch Manning. And as long as you have a price on Texas, people will bet that. So he thinks Texas will be favored. And nobody has this up yet, the title odds for next year. So he would have Texas favored. But then he said, ... if I was betting, Notre Dame.
I can't believe I finished your sentence there. And that's not because Brad is a Notre Dame guy. That was me legitimately saying Notre Dame with what they've done in the portal. And you've got CJ Carr back. And even without Jeremiah Love, their backfield and their schedule, they get Miami at home next year. They're going to start very highly in the rankings. Notre Dame is certainly a team I think you do need to look at next year. Yeah, but you're right. I haven't seen any title odds. I did see like Heisman Trophy odds. And again, I just kind of based it off of that because I think Arch Manning was the favorite and CJ Carr was the second choice. Before we let you go, Sammy, about the 2-minute drill, I kind of think we're going to see similar movement on game day like we did with Miami, Ohio State, where that number came all the way down to 7.5. I think we're going to get there again on Monday night where we're going to see buyback from a lot of people. Do you think that way from based on people and conversations you've had?
It's a fair guess because if you think about the way this Miami team has performed as a dog, it's been very profitable. And hell, look at the playoff alone. They got shoved against A&M. First number there was Miami +5. That game closed 3. And then against Ohio State, that number got close to 10. Didn't get to 10, but got close. And then by kickoff at 7.5. The Sharps bet Miami when they're dogs. The Sharps fade when Miami's the favorite.
It's interesting, Bear, because I think some of that is Mario Cristobal's team. We saw it like they were played pretty clean in those other games, and then they got into the Ole Miss game, and it was a bunch of penalties, and it felt a little bit, or maybe even a lot, like Miami in the second half of last year when it felt like they were doing everything they could to kind of screw it up.
And that's something that Jeff Schwartz brought up on Bear Bets earlier in the week. He said more plays creates more opportunity for more mistakes, more penalties, more turnovers. And I think that's kind of what we saw against Ole Miss. You saw 10 penalties, 4 dropped interceptions, missed field goal, tipped red zone interception. I was sitting there, and with the Miami people I were with, we're like, okay, this is the SMU game all over again. All the mistakes are going to go on, and so many opportunities missed, but they won this time. And this narrative about Mario Cristobal can't win a big game, it's kind of, you might want to put that on the back burner because you're looking at a team already this year. You're beaten in terms of the SP Plus top 10. Ohio State's number 2. Beat them. Notre Dame's number 3. Beat them. Ole Miss number 6. You beat them. Texas A&M number 10. You beat them. It's been those games, like Sammy said, the Sharps like betting Miami as a dog. It's been those games that Miami has been the big favorite that sometimes they come out and don't necessarily play great.
I'll be pulling for you guys. Here we go. One last time. Zoom out for the U. There we go, baby.
Let's go. Let's get it done.
Okay, Bear. Let's get to the 2-minute drill where we're going to give our predictions for Monday night. Why don't you start at your show?
No, it's your show. You're the first thing people see. It says Bruce first, but I'll go first. I think Miami's going to win. I think people are kind of hung up on this. Okay, Miami lost to Louisville. Miami lost to SMU. Miami very easily could have lost to Ole Miss. Mario Cristobal's not a great head coach. We don't trust Carson Beck to win games. Like everyone's hung up on that. And not what Miami has actually done this year that I just talked about. I think them in the role of a big underdog. Look, all because they're motivated in the games in their home stadium doesn't mean they're going to it. But I think the Miami front is going to have a very successful day on both sides of the ball, controlling the line of scrimmage on both sides. I think Miami wins, and I think they get their 6th national championship, and Mario Cristobal wins the title of his alma mater.
If you made me pick the winner, I'd go Indiana, but I love the Miami bet. Taking the points seems really nice. Let's go 23-20 Indiana, Bruce. That's what I'll say.
All right. Well, I'm going to break the tie. Sorry, Bear. I'm going to go against
It's okay.
against the school you and I both graduated from. In a lot of ways, I could see this playing out where Miami wins, and referencing back to what we talked about a little bit ago about Alabama probably shouldn't have been in the playoff. Oregon was really banged up and imploded. And the other piece of that is I've talked to a lot of coaches this week, and one of the things that kept coming up is, well, you probably need to have these 13, 14 play drives where you really run the ball in and are patient. That's what Miami has done. That sounds like Miami is almost
interesting
ideal for this, right?
All right.
A couple weeks ago, Ohio State, which has a really good defense, and no one's really been able to run the ball on them. Miami averaged over 4 yards a carry and ran for over 150, right? So there is that. But the part I'm going to stay on here is Indiana's had this magical season, and I think it's just been Fernando Mendoza's year. You saw the bounce back from the pick six at Oregon early in the season. You saw him bounce back from a fourth quarter interception against Penn State, and they had that spectacular drive and great catch by Omar Cooper Jr. I'm going to go with Mendoza here on the homecoming game, no less, 27-17.
Sammy, I just came up with a nice nickname for Bruce. I'm going to
Trader?
call him the gardener because he's already hedging. But Miami can do those 13, 14 play. Oh, they did run on it. All right. The gardener's on Indiana. All right, we got
Bear, you want the gardener to be on Indiana. Let me tell you that.
I do.
Last year I picked Oregon to win the national title. That didn't work out. The year before that, I got a Michigan right, but that was about the only thing. This year I've been wrong a bunch of times. I picked Clemson to win the national title. You want the gardener on Indiana this week.
Yeah. Let's just say about Miami fans and everyone down there, they're thanking you for your service with your column earlier in the week with all 12 coaches that you talked to picking Indiana to win the game. That's the type of stuff that they appreciate down there.
I didn't intend it for it to be that way, but that's what it was. So, but I think there's a lot of people who can do what I did and kind of talk myself into the path how Miami wins. To me, this would not feel like, oh, this is TCU trying to knock off Georgia. I mean, Miami is a big physical team. The team with, probably have 3 first-round picks on, in the upcoming draft. And Carson Beck's played a ton of big games. And Mark Fletcher seems to be a great fit. So for what Miami wants to do, I mean, it would not be surprising at all. Whereas some of these other times, I think it's more surprising when I wouldn't have picked, I think this game that Bob Stoops' national title was at Florida. It was, against Florida State. Mm-hmm. I didn't see that coming. That was down there too. So you never know.
Well, getting near the end here of the show, of the 2-minute drill. We're approaching the end zone. Carson Beck has just hit Keelan Marion for a big play, and Miami is set up to score. So we're going to try and punch it in here at the end. I want to give a shout out to my Big Noon kickoff colleague, Mark Ingram, inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. So this year we had Urban Meyer go into the College Football Hall of Fame. We had a great time at the dinner in National Football Foundation dinner in Vegas. We get to do it all over again. My man Tutu lives in South Florida. Maybe I'll get to catch up with them on Sunday or Monday prior to the game. Unbelievable dude. I think everyone sees the energy and the excitement and the passion and the fun that he has on the Big Noon set, that's who he is in person. And getting to know him and getting to know his dad and hanging out with them and just all the stories and all the expertise and just the positive vibes that he has and the humor and the levity. He's awesome, and I couldn't be happier for the first Alabama Heisman Trophy winner ever to get into the College Football Hall of Fame.
Yeah, same here for me. I mean, when he joined us, he's just this bundle of joy and positive energy, and he's just fun to be around. And it's just really cool. I'm also glad when there was at one point where I thought he maimed an influencer when the guy tried to tackle him, and I was like, oh God, his TV career is going to end right when it's about to start. Fun fact on Mark Ingram: I once golfed with him and Urban and Mark's dad in Colorado. No lie, his first drive off the first tee was 404 yards. It was at altitude, but he can golf and he can crush a ball.
We went this year when one of the 2 times the show was in Champaign, Illinois. We got to do like the golf facility. They're a very, very good golf program, and they have all these swing speed monitors and analyzers. And when first drive off the tee, the golf coach was like, "Oh my, you got a hell of a swing." And like he's looking at like this the driver head speed and like all these other things. Are like, damn, you can play.
He grew up he was a junior golfer, and it wasn't like he just started late and he was like one of these quarterbacks who can do everything. He actually played a ton when he was a kid. While we're doing that, I also want to congratulate our other colleague from Fox Sports and the guy I worked with every weekend this year, Chris Peterson, legendary coach from Boise State and from Washington, and just a blast to watch games with. He is the smartest football guy I know. And very excited for him. And it's really cool. Like you said, I mean, just to have your colleagues go in who are legendary figures. I mean, obviously one with a Heisman, the other guy who is like the most daring coach. And now he's like, that expression, this fits for him. He's like your favorite coach's favorite coach. Because that's how, whether it's Sean McVay or a half dozen other guys, they all are trying to, pick his brain, and they all go to him for wisdom. And so it's just cool we get to work with him.
Yeah. And people who, like, you think of Boise State, and people may have the Statue of Liberty play, and they were successful, but he was the guy who made Boise State Boise. And I'm sure he'll deflect all the praise to the coaches that were there before him. But when he became the Boise State head coach, that was when they went from, oh yeah, nice group of 5 school, great story, you don't want to play them, to, oh my God, they should be playing Oregon for the national championship. They should be like, they were the team. When he got there, they became like the national story and not just this plucky underdog story. That's when they really started beating up on the big boys and were a national contender. So yeah, great to see Chris Peterson get his due into the College Football Hall of Fame as well. So that'll do it. We got 1 game left Monday night, and like I said, we are either going to get a great story one way or another. Either Miami wins a national title with their alumnus Mario Cristobal as head coach for a title, and would be nearly 25 years, or we're going to get the most unlikely winner of a national championship in college football history and the losingest program ever, when Curt Cignetti took over, and 2 years later, 16-0 national champ. So a great story to be written on Monday night, regardless of who wins. Sammy P, this was fun all year long. Maybe we can do something again to wrap up the season. Bruce, I look forward to catching up with you in Miami. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Appreciate everybody all year long. Rate, review, subscribe, all those good things. Remember, most importantly, the less you bet, the more you lose when you win.